Hosea lived in the northern kingdom of Israel almost 800 years before Jesus. His writing comes just a few decades before Isaiah, who lived in the south. God wanted this prophet to deliver a message to the people of Israel, and parts of the message to this comfortable and complacent people read like the anguished words of a father to his wayward son. Listen to these verses from chapter 11. When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. The more I called them, the more they went from me. They kept sacrificing to the Baals and offering incense to idols. Yet it was I who taught Ephraim to walk. I took them up in my arms, but they did not know that I healed them. I led them with cords of human kindness, with bands of love. I was to them like those who lift infants to their cheeks. I bent down to them and fed them. When Jesus taught the disciples to call God Father, he was drawing on ideas that had their roots in Old Testament passages like this one in Hosea. You won't find the word Father anywhere in Hosea 11, and yet the idea of Father is unmistakable. Here is a mixture of compassion, disappointment, frustration and patience, all the emotions a father might experience. When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. We hear God looking back and remembering with fondness how he had once scooped his precious children up as they struggled under the heavy loads that Pharaoh made them bear. God loved Israel, his child. Out of Egypt he called his son. And yet he says, the more I called them, the more they went from me. How many fathers could identify with that? The world has its fair share of proud fathers, but history is also littered with stories of heartbreak, and not just between fathers and sons. In this life, relationships often include disappointment. Sons and daughters, mums and dads, brothers and sisters, husbands, wives, friends, partners can all be frail and fallible. If you have ever felt let down by another person, then Hosea 11 says that you're not alone. Hosea 11 says that even God felt let down. And if you read on through Hosea, you will discover that God keeps on feeling let down. We like stories to have happy endings. We hope that the children of God will see the error of their ways and return to him. But instead, what Hosea gives us is an image of God not giving up, still waiting, still hoping, still forgiving, and no sign of a response from Israel. I wonder if that is what inspired Jesus to tell the story of the prodigal son. Do you remember that story? In Luke chapter 15, the father waits with outstretched arms, and the wayward son does indeed return home. And even the other son, the one that stayed behind and was supposed to be faithful, he turned out to be frail and fallible too. Look again at Hosea. God says, I took them up in my arms, but they did not know that I healed them. Years ago, when my eldest son Gareth was just a small boy, we had an accident. It was kind of my fault. I was relaxing with the family in a holiday cottage. I had sprained my ankle a few days earlier and it was still very tender. There I was with my foot raised to ease the swelling, and Gareth was tearing around as young boys do. But I had just finished my coffee and I left this empty earthenware mug on the floor beside me. It shattered as Gareth fell onto it, making a big cut in his side. We had to make a trip to the hospital where Gareth received stitches without anaesthetic. I couldn't take credit for the skill of the person administering the stitches, but I wanted my son to know that I was there. It was a privilege to console him, hugging him, taking his mind off the needle piercing his skin, telling him that I loved him. And Hosea says that this is how our fatherly God feels about his children. That was how our fatherly God felt then about the children of Israel centuries before Jesus. And that was how God felt about the people that Jesus moved amongst and healed. This is how our fatherly God feels now about you and me. I took them in my arms, but they did not know that I healed them. People today need to know that God loves them like that kind of father. The Bible teaches us that God is perfect, but his perfection isn't the classical textbook kind that Greeks like Plato described. God's perfection isn't the finely balanced sort that would mean nothing can affect him. God's perfect love is more like that of a flesh and blood father who just won't give up loving his children no matter what. Amazingly, God's perfect love is the kind of love that makes him vulnerable. God's perfect love is the kind of love that can end up getting messy because God has chosen to spend himself on frail and fallible creatures like you and me. God's love makes God vulnerable. And so Jesus, the Son that never let God down, and Jesus, the man that John's Gospel describes as God, the Word made flesh, Jesus demonstrates this perfect godly love by being vulnerable and suffering and dying for you and me. The good news is that God continues to love you and me in the same way. The challenge is that we all love others and each other with this same love. I pray for you and for me that God will keep on filling us with his Spirit, overwhelming us with his love. And as we cooperate with him, transform the lives of those around us.